Hey everyone, and welcome back. Get ready, because today we're going to be diving deep into memory and all those crazy techniques people use to memorize insane amounts of information.
You ready to unlock the secrets of the memory masters?
I am. I've always been fascinated by those folks who can remember decks of cards or pi to the thousandth decimal.
It's wild, right? Like, how do they do it?
Well, that's what we're here to find out.
Exactly. And luckily, we've got a great jumping off point for our deep dive.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
A YouTube video from Ciencia Todo Dia called Cómo memorizar absolutamente todo.
How to memorize absolutely everything. Okay, that's a bold claim, but I'm intrigued. So where do we even begin with something as complex as memory?
Well, first we got to understand the basics of how memory actually works. Think of your brain like a massive network.
A network.
Yeah, like a city with all those electrical impulses zipping between neurons. They're like the buildings.
Okay, I can picture that. Lots of activity connections being made.
Exactly. And those connections are made through synapses. Think of those as the streets connecting the buildings.
So it's this constant flow of information, kind of like rush hour traffic in our brains. But where does all that information actually get stored?
That's where the hippocampus comes in. It's kind of like the brain's librarian, constantly organizing and filing away our experiences and knowledge.
Okay, so the hippocampus is the ultimate organizer. But I've always heard about short-term memory and long-term memory. How do those fit into the picture?
Think of short-term memory as like a sticky note on your desk. It's good for holding a piece of information briefly, like a phone number, but it's not meant for long-term storage.
So it's temporary and limited. What about long-term memory then?
Long-term memory is more like a massive library. It's where we store all those important memories from childhood experiences to facts and knowledge.
So that's where my embarrassing middle school moments go to live forever, huh?
Pretty much. And those catchy pop song lyrics you can't get out of your head, those are in there too.
So long-term memory is like a giant storehouse for all our experiences and knowledge. But is it just one big category?
Nope, not at all. It's more like a library with different wings or sections.
Different sections.
Well, there's episodic memory, which is for specific events, like that time you went to Disneyland or graduated high school.
Right, those big milestones. What else?
Then you have semantic memory, which is for facts and general knowledge, like knowing that Paris is the capital of France or that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius.
So episodic memory is like our personal diary, and semantic memory is like a mental encyclopedia. Makes sense. But what about when our memory fails us? Like those times when you can't remember someone's name or totally blank on a test.
Those brain farts happen to the best of us. And sometimes those memory slip-ups can be a sign of something more serious. You know, the video claims to teach us how to memorize absolutely everything.
Yeah.
But the reality is that sometimes our memory can be impaired by certain conditions.
Right, like Alzheimer's disease. It's heartbreaking to see how it can rob people of their memories and their sense of self.
It really is. Alzheimer's is a complex and devastating disease that primarily affects long-term memory, but over time, it can impact other cognitive functions as well.
So it's not just about forgetting things. It can affect a person's ability to think and even move. That's scary.
It is, and it highlights how important it is to take care of our brains. But Alzheimer's isn't the only condition that can affect memory.
What else is there?
Well, there's ADHD, for example. People with ADHD often have trouble holding information in their short-term memory, and they can struggle to maintain focus, which obviously affects their ability to learn and function in daily life.
So it's not just about memory, it's about attention, too.
Exactly. And then there's dyslexia. You know, people with dyslexia have difficulty with phonological processing, which is the way sounds are represented in our brains. This can make it really challenging to learn to read and spell.
So different memory functions can be affected in different ways.
Yeah.
It really shows how complex our brains are. But here's something that's always blown my mind. False memories. Like, how is it possible to remember something that never actually happened?
Right. That's one of the weirdest things about memory. The thing is, our brains aren't perfect recording devices.
What do you mean?
Well, every time we recall a memory, we're essentially reconstructing it. It's not like we're playing back a video. It's more like we're piecing together a puzzle. And sometimes we might add pieces that weren't there originally or misinterpret the picture altogether.
So our memories are more like an interpretation of the past than a perfect record? It's kind of unsettling, especially when you think about things like eyewitness testimony.
Exactly. Eyewitness accounts can be incredibly unreliable because our memories are so easily influenced by suggestion, emotions, the way questions are phrased. It makes you realize that what we remember isn't always the objective truth.
That's a bit scary. Okay, let's shift gears for a sec and talk about something a little more fun.
Mm-hmm.
What about déjà vu? You know, that feeling of, I've been here before, even though you haven't. Have you ever experienced that?
Oh, totally. I think everyone has had that eerie feeling of familiarity in a completely new situation at some point. Scientists are still debating what causes it, but one theory is that it might be a temporary glitch in the communication between the hippocampus and the frontal lobe.
Like a short circuit in the brain's wiring?
Yeah, something like that, and it leads to that feeling of, I've already lived this moment.
So trippy.
Mm.
But the video also talked about something called jamais vu, which I'd never even heard of before. What's that all about?
Jamais vu is kind of like the opposite of déjà vu. It's that weird feeling of unfamiliarity with something that you know you've experienced before. Imagine looking at your own hand and suddenly feeling like you've never seen it before, even though you know it's yours.
Whoa, that's even weirder than déjà vu. Speaking of strange memory phenomena, we've got to talk about the Mandela effect. You know, where large groups of people share the same false memory.
The Mandela effect is fascinating. It's a great example of how social influence can shape our individual memories. Like, there's that popular example in Brazil where tons of people believe that Dragon Ball Z was interrupted by the news of 9/11.
Wait, that didn't actually happen. I could have sworn.
Nope. Turns out it was Mickey Mouse that was airing at the time. The TV Global Archives confirmed it.
Mind blown. So, how do these collective false memories take root?
It's probably a combination of factors. You know, similar childhood experiences, exposure to the same media, the power of suggestion. All these things can contribute to forming a shared false memory, especially if it feels plausible or emotionally resonant.
So our memories are a lot less reliable than we think.
It seems that way. But hey, before we go down the rabbit hole of memory illusions, let's get practical. How can we actually improve our memory? Is it possible to train our brains to be more like those memory champions we see on TV? Well, while not everyone can become a memory athlete, there are definitely things we can all do to sharpen our memory skills. And it starts with taking care of ourselves. Good sleep, balanced nutrition, regular exercise, all those things play a vital role in keeping our brains in top shape.
So it's like physical fitness for our brains. I like that. But are there specific techniques we can use to boost our memory power, apart from just being healthy?
Oh, absolutely. There are tons of techniques out there. But we can start with a few simple ones that you can easily incorporate into your daily life. Like one trick for remembering everyday objects is to associate them with things you use frequently. For example, if you're always forgetting your wallet, you could try keeping it next to your house keys.
Okay, that's pretty smart. What about remembering names? I'm terrible with names.
We've all been there. One trick is to try linking the new person to someone you already know with the same name. Or try creating a bizarre mental image that connects their appearance to their name. The more outlandish the image, the better.
I can see how that would work. The video also goes into some more advanced techniques like the link system and the major system for memorizing lists and numbers. Those sound pretty intense.
They might seem intimidating at first, but with practice they can be incredibly powerful tools. The link system is all about creating a chain of visual associations to help you remember a sequence of items. So you start with the first item on your list and then create a vivid mental image that links it to the second item and then the second to the third and so on.
So it's like a mental chain reaction of images.
Yeah, exactly.
But where does the memory palace fit into all of this? I've heard memory champions talk about building these elaborate mental structures.
The memory palace is a technique where you use a familiar location, like your house or your childhood neighborhood, as a mental canvas for organizing those linked images. You basically place the things you want to remember in specific spots within that space. Like, the video gave an example with a grocery list. You could imagine a giant carton of milk spilling on your couch, a loaf of bread balancing precariously on your car's antenna, and a bunch of bananas dangling from your rearview mirror.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. So you're basically turning your house into a memory game board.
Exactly. It can be a really fun and effective way to memorize things.
What about the major system? That one's for numbers, right?
Yep, the major system involves assigning a consonant sound to each digit and then using those consonants to create words or phrases that represent the numbers you want to remember.
So instead of trying to remember a random string of numbers, you transform them into something more meaningful.
That's pretty clever. But before we go full-on memory athlete, I think we need a moment to process all this amazing info. Agreed. It's a lot to take in, but it's exciting stuff, right?
Totally. We'll be back soon to explore how we can actually apply these techniques to our everyday lives and maybe even unlock our own inner memory champion. And we're back, ready to dive even deeper into the world of memory.
Absolutely. We were just starting to get into some of those really powerful memory techniques.
Yeah, those link system and major system things, they still sound kind of intimidating to me. Are they really for everyone, or do you have to be some kind of memory savant to use them effectively?
I think anyone can learn these techniques with a little practice. It's not about having a special gift for memory.
So it's more about training your brain to think differently, to make connections and create those crazy mental images.
Exactly. It's like learning a new language or a musical instrument. The more you practice, the more natural it becomes.
Okay, so let's break it down a bit further. How would I actually use the link system in real life?
Well, let's say you have a grocery list you need to remember. Milk, eggs, bread, bananas, and cheese. Instead of trying to hold all those items in your head, you can create a story using those items.
A story.
Yeah. And the weirder and more memorable, the better.
Okay, I'm game. Let's see. I could picture a giant carton of milk exploding in my living room, covering everything in a sticky mess.
Perfect. Now, how would you connect that image to eggs?
Maybe those spilled milk is attracting a swarm of giant flying eggshells, cracking open and raining yolk everywhere.
Now you're getting it. The more outlandish, the better. Now, how about connecting the eggs to the bread?
Okay, I'm picturing those flying eggshells landing on a giant loaf of bread, turning it into this gooey, eggy mess.
Awesome. You're a natural. Now, keep going. Link the bread to the bananas and then to the cheese. Create a crazy story that you can replay in your mind later.
This is so fun. I can definitely see how this would make remembering things a lot easier.
Right. And the more you practice, the easier it gets.
But what about the major system for numbers? That one still seems a bit more technical.
It might seem that way at first, but once you get the basic idea, it becomes pretty intuitive. Remember, it's all about assigning a consonant sound to each digit and then using those consonants to create words or phrases that represent the numbers you want to remember.
So, like if I wanted to remember my friend's birthday, which is 08-12, 1988, let's see, 0 is S, 8 is F, 1 is T, 2 is N, 9 is P, and 8 is F again. So we have SFTN, PFF, now what?
Now you get to be creative. Use those consonant sounds to form words or even a short phrase. For SF, you could use safe, and for TNN, maybe tiny. PF could be puff. And for F, how about fluffy?
So the phrase to remember my friend's birthday would be safe, tiny, puff, fluffy. I can definitely remember that. It's way easier than memorizing those 8 digits separately.
Right, it's all about making those connections and finding patterns.
But speaking of memory champs, do they actually use these same techniques, just on a much grander scale?
Oh, absolutely. Memory athletes train their brains rigorously. They use these techniques, along with other strategies and mental discipline, to push the limits of memory.
It's amazing what the human mind can achieve, isn't it?
It really is. And it's not just about memorizing random facts and figures. These techniques can be applied to all sorts of things, like learning languages, studying for exams, or even just remembering where you parked your car.
So it's about strengthening those mental muscles and improving our overall cognitive abilities.
Exactly. And the best part is anyone can do it. It's never too late to start challenging your brain and expanding your memory capacity.
I love that. It's so empowering to realize that we have more control over our memory than we might think. But is there a downside to having, like, a super sharp memory? Wouldn't it be overwhelming to remember every little detail of your life?
That's a great question, and there is such a thing as having too much memory. There are people with highly superior autobiographical memory who remember almost everything that's ever happened to them. And for some of them, it can be overwhelming. It's like having this constant stream of memories flooding their minds.
Wow, that does sound intense. So it's really about finding a balance. Like, you want to have a strong memory, but you also want to be able to let go of things and not get bogged down by every little detail.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can access and utilize your memories effectively without getting overwhelmed.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. I used to think of memory as this passive thing, but now I see it as this dynamic process that we can actually shape and train.
I'm glad you're finding it helpful. It's truly fascinating how much power we have over our own minds.
This deep dive is already changing the way I think about memory. It's not just about remembering facts and figures. It's about understanding how our brains work and using that knowledge to enhance our cognitive abilities.
I think that's a fantastic takeaway. It's about recognizing the incredible potential of the human mind and the power we have to shape our own cognitive destinies.
I love that. Well, this has been an incredible journey through the fascinating world of memory. We've covered so much ground, from the basic science to those mind-blowing techniques used by memory champions.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to unlock their own memory superpowers.
I know I am. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts. What's the most important thing you want our listeners to remember from this deep dive?
If I had to choose one key takeaway, it would be that memory is not this fixed, static entity. It's a dynamic process that we can actively shape and improve. It's like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger and more flexible it becomes.
That's a great analogy. It's so empowering to know that we're not stuck with the memory skills we have. We can actually train our brains to be more efficient, more focused, and more capable.
Absolutely, and anyone can do it. It's about understanding how memory works and then using that knowledge to your advantage.
This whole deep dive has been a revelation. It's changed the way I think about memory.
I'm glad to hear that. It's a fascinating subject, and there's always more to learn.
Speaking of learning, what advice would you give to our listeners who are excited to start improving their memory skills? Where should they begin?
I'd say start small and have fun with it. Incorporate those simple techniques we talked about into your daily routine. Associate objects you want to remember with things you use often. Create vivid mental pictures to link items together, and practice those consonant sound associations for numbers. The key is to be consistent and find what works best for you.
And don't be afraid to experiment. Maybe the link system clicks for you, or maybe you prefer the major system. It's all about finding the tools that fit your learning style.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a race. Be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and keep challenging your brain.
Awesome advice. This deep dive has been an incredible adventure. We've explored the science behind memory, those sneaky ways it can trick us, and most importantly, how we can take control and improve our memory skills.
It's been a joy sharing this journey with you and our listeners. I hope it sparked a sense of wonder about the amazing power of the human mind.
For sure. To keep that spark alive, let's leave our listeners with a challenge. Think back to a seemingly insignificant memory from your past, something you haven't thought about in years. Now, try to examine it more closely using some of the techniques we've explored. You could try placing it in a memory palace or create a vivid image to represent it. You might be surprised by what you discover.
It's amazing how a simple memory can hold hidden depths when we look at it with fresh eyes.
Exactly. Our memories aren't just static records. They're living narratives that shape who we are. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those memory muscles working.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive. See you next time for another fascinating adventure into the world of knowledge.
And we're back for the final leg of our memory marathon.
Phew, we've covered a lot of ground, haven't we?
We have. From the nitty-gritty of how memories form to those crazy tricks our brains pull, and even some cool tips to boost our memory game.
It's been a wild ride.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I'm curious, what do you think is the big takeaway from all this? Like, if our listeners only remember one thing from our deep dive, what should it be?
The one thing, I'd say the most important thing to remember is that memory isn't like set in stone.
It's not.
No, it's this dynamic process that we can actually, shape and improve. Like, it really is kind of like a muscle. The more we use it, the stronger and more flexible it gets.
I like that analogy. It makes me feel like I have more control over my memory than I thought.
Exactly. And the cool thing is that anyone can do it. You don't need some special talent or anything. It's just about understanding how memory works and using that knowledge to your advantage.
This whole deep dive has been a real eye-opener. I used to think of memory as this, passive thing, but now I see it as something I can actually work on and develop.
It's pretty empowering, right?
Totally. So, any advice for our listeners who want to start improving their memory skills? Where should they begin?
I think starting small and keeping it fun is key. Try those easy techniques we talked about, like connecting things you want to remember to stuff you use all the time, or making up those crazy mental images. Oh, and practicing those consonant sounds for remembering numbers. Consistency is important too, of course, and finding what works best for you.
And don't be afraid to mix things up. Maybe the link system is your jam, or maybe the major system is more your style. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. It's all about finding what clicks for you and makes learning fun. Remember, it's a journey, not a race. So be patient with yourself, celebrate your progress, and keep challenging your brain.
Solid advice. Well, folks, this has been an awesome adventure through the world of memory. We've learned about the science, those sneaky ways our memories can play tricks on us, and best of all, how we can take charge and improve our memory skills.
It's been a real pleasure exploring all this with you, and I hope our listeners are feeling inspired to unlock their own memory potential.
I know I am. And to keep the inspiration flowing, let's leave our listeners with a little challenge. Think back to a seemingly insignificant memory from your past. Something you haven't thought about in ages.
Okay.
Now, try to really examine that memory using some of the techniques we talked about. Maybe put it in a memory palace or create a vivid mental image to represent it. You might be surprised by what you discover.
Yeah, it's amazing how a simple memory can hold so much depth when we look at it in a new way.
Right. Our memories aren't just static records. They're living parts of who we are. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those memory muscles working. That's all for the deep dive today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time for another exciting exploration.